Today on Mr. Media, I'll welcome film director and editor Roger Nygard back to the show for the third time. Today's topic, Season 8 of Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm, on which Roger is an editor. Stick around and prepare to get uncomfortable. So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRmedia.com. Stop by and check it out. There are more than 700 archived celebrity and pop culture interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by Audible. Audible is offering Mr. Media listeners a free audiobook download and a 14-day trial offer to give you a chance to check out their very cool service. I love listening to books on tape. If you've never tried it before, actors or sometimes the authors themselves read to you. It's great for the commute, the beach, or even unwinding before bed. You can choose a free audiobook from Audible's enormous library of titles, including today's top comedy bestsellers, such as Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, read by Tina Fey, or the Woody Allen collection, read by Woody Allen. You know, I saw that on the list and I thought, I gotta own that one. That's a good one. Or, they also have Are You There, Vodka? It's Me, Chelsea, written and read by Chelsea Handler. You could also download The Profiler, not a comedy, but written by famed criminal profiler Pat Brown and yours truly, which Pat will read to you personally. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience that hopes Curb Your Enthusiasm and Larry David will go on forever in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. The last time Roger Nygard was a guest on this show, he was in a it's the blurriness. The last time Roger Nygard was a guest on this show, he was in a video editing suite in Hollywood, and I was where I always am, in the living room studio with the whorehouse red walls. Our subject that day was the release of the expanded edition of Nygard's terrific, globe-trotting documentary, The Nature of Existence, as well as the passing of one of its subjects, Irvin Kershner, director of the Star Wars sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. In the course of setting the shot, Roger mentioned that we needed to be done on time because Larry David was likely to be walking through the door behind him at any time. Back up a minute, I said. Larry David? The Larry David I'm thinking of? Well, it turns out that Roger, on top of his many other credits, has been one of 2 video editors on seasons 6, 7, and 8 of David's long-running HBO show, Curb Your Enthusiasm. And yes, my mind was blown a little. I didn't see that one coming. So I made him promise to come back on our show to talk about season 8, which begins on Sunday, July 10th. As for Roger, I was mostly aware of his documentary work until that time. In addition to Existence, he also directed Trekkies, Trekkies 2, and several other films, including some documentary and comedy stuff. But it turns out he's also quite accomplished in TV sitcoms, having worked on The Office, The Bernie Mac Show, and the very funny but very short-lived Mind of the Married Man. Roger Nygard, welcome back to Mr. Media.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I feel like a veteran, my third time here.
Yeah, I guess you kind of are. I think 4 is the most anyone's come back. So
I'm going for that record. I'm going for 5.
Well, hey, you are welcome. Always good company to have on the show. Always entertaining, and man, you get some good projects to work on. Now, I still can't get over how casually you dropped the Curb Your Enthusiasm bomb on me that day. I'm figuring you must be great at parties with that little revelation.
Well, yeah, for fans of the show, for certainly, you know, some people are really freaked out and weirded out and as you mentioned, really uncomfortable watching the show. And that translates into this fear they have of Larry David. Some people are just more afraid of Larry David than they were of Osama bin Laden for some reason, because it seems like, you know, when if the character on the show that he plays anyway, he could walk into any situation and you can have a slight altercation with him and he will just tear you apart over it, right? Or if you make a slightest, you know, social faux pas, or you take too much time in line getting a little bit of ice cream, he will call you out on it. And so people hate being called out, right? But in their daily life, it doesn't happen that often, but it happens all the time in the show. And that's what people, I think, are most fearful of.
Are there that many people? Maybe out in Hollywood, are there that many people that worry about running into Larry in public situations? I mean, it's not an issue for me here in Florida. Although I understand maybe he has family down here, but I'm not too worried about it day to day.
Well, he's all over the place. You'll see him. You can see him anytime. In West Los Angeles. That's where he lives, and that's where he eats and plays golf. And so it's not that hard to run into Larry David. The funny thing is, when you do, the contrast between who he really is and his character is kind of startling, because he's such a nice guy and really gracious. The character, has elements of who he is, exaggerated, of course, for comedy. But as far as like somebody to work with, he's been the easiest person to work with, maybe in my entire career.
Wow. Well, and I was trying to remember where it was, but somewhere in the past year, I saw an interview with him, and it wasn't like in one of these kind of Jay Leno hyped up kind of atmospheres, but it was just sitting down and talking about some of his work and things, and he just seemed, he was definitely not the Larry David on Curb. He was, or even the Larry David in Whatever Works or any of that kind of thing. It was just, he just seemed like a fascinating guy to talk to, very, very even, and I thought, and that's what I was kind of curious, as I guess anyone would be. When you're working with him, as you do, which guy do you see, off screen? I'm assuming it's the genial, guy who's got a job to do.
Yeah, well, you see parts of both, though, because the show is about, to a great extent, things he experiences in his own life, and so you get to witness him experiencing some of those things in his own life. Last season, I remember maybe the biggest biggest event of the entire season was when Larry's BlackBerry automatically updated his crossword puzzle software and completely changed, the way, or maybe even slightly changed, but it was changed enough that it annoyed him. So weeks were spent going back and forth with the top programmers at BlackBerry trying to get his BlackBerry back to the way it was, which it turned out was not possible. He had to buy a whole new older version or some other BlackBerry, because his had somehow been permanently, made into some new version. And so anyway, it was one long ordeal so that he could do his crossword puzzles the way he was used to doing his crossword puzzles.
So you got your own personal episode.
Well, don't be surprised if you see something like that appear, in season 9 or 10 or something.
Well, I like the sound of that there might be a season 9 or 10. I'm not asking you, but it would be nice.
Well, nobody ever knows, It's like the end of the season. We all feel pretty good about it. And season 8 will be no exception. I think if you're a Curb Your Enthusiasm fan, season 8 should be very satisfying for you. I think it's as funny as any season, but then it's just a matter of, will there be a next season? Everybody asks, and Larry goes, I don't know, and generally, time goes by and he starts writing the scripts, and then he calls HBO and says, I think I'll do another season. So that's what's happened every year. Will it happen again? I don't know yet. We don't know.
Now, I saw, peeking at the HBO site, that the first episode of Season 8 is called The Divorce. And a lot of the seasons, certainly the latter seasons, when you've worked, I think, they've had a theme to each season. Something's been going on. There was the Seinfeld reunion. There was Larry on Broadway, things like that. Does this season have a theme, or is it a series of less connected episodes?
Well, I guess, the title really is a tip-off. I'm not really allowed to disclose the story, but, if you recall how season 7 ended, it ended with Larry back together with Cheryl on the couch, and they're together, right? The whole season was about them getting back together after, splitting up. And so season 8 begins right where season 7 left off, with Larry David and his wife Cheryl on the couch. And the episode's called The Divorce, so you can presume things don't go that well in the next few seconds after where season 7 ended.
Well, we have to remind people that he so wanted to get back together with Cheryl that he put together that whole Seinfeld reunion, essentially, just to get another shot with his ex-wife. It was
Right, but then he's like can't help himself, right? And he has to be who he is. And Cheryl, as you recall in the last scene, he asks Cheryl, "Do you respect wood?" Because she left a ring stain. She put a wet glass on the wooden table and left a ring stain, which Larry got blamed for. And so he finally found the culprit was Cheryl. So you can't let that slide by once he finds out she's the culprit. He's got to call her out on it, which is what Larry does. He calls people out on the things they do, right, when they're being deceptive or doing something socially inappropriate. And, of course, that's going to lead to friction.
Well, he's got to be Larry. He can't be, he can't be someone else. He's got to be who he is. I wanted to ask you on the technical side with what you do on the show. The public, the media, we've all heard the stories of how Larry starts taping each episode with kind of a rough concept, and then the story and the dialogue take shape almost on the fly. And Cheryl Hines and Jeff Garlin have both been on Mr. Media, and have talked about both the challenges and the rewards of that kind of process. But what I'm wondering about from you is, does that make it harder or easier for the editor on an episode who has to put it all together? Because it hasn't been, it hasn't come together from a script. You don't have a script to fall back on.
It makes it vastly more difficult to work from no script, because then you have to, in a sense, create the scene in the editing room based on the raw material they give you while they're improvising. They do start out with a script, and I dug out a couple of copies here. This is one of the scripts, right? And this is the front cover page, and you keep constantly get updates. And so here's show number 1. Season 8, right? And so you start out, you can see that there's a 1 paragraph there for the first scene. And it says we run the final scene from Season 7. And so we start out with a little update on Season 7, the final scene. And then it tells what happens next. So as the editor, I work from this and the footage and craft the best scene that I can. And it takes much longer than what you call a circled takes show, where they've worked from a script, and then the director tells the script the continuity person which are his favorites, and he or she circles those takes. And so you just have to work primarily from the favorite takes, and that goes much more quickly. You don't have to help create the story in the editing room. It's theoretically been written, and it's in a finished form in the script. So in a sense, I've heard editing described as the final rewrite of the script. And with Curb Your Enthusiasm and an improv show, which works from just this basic outline, maybe a paragraph per scene, it's very much a rewrite, the final rewrite of the script, because the script is continually being written, and the script is not finished until we do our final mix, because we're adding lines all the time. And one of the secrets of the show, if you watch closely, you'll notice that a lot of the lines, especially storylines that set things up, like, you remember that hammer you saw in, scene 3, and, that's in my hand now? We'll come up with a line. Larry will think of something to say that will reestablish the premise, because you don't laugh at the punchline if you've forgotten the setup. And sometimes while improvising, they forget or they don't cover something as strongly as they should. And so we put a lot of lines on the backs of heads. So watch for looped lines or lines that are the back of Larry's head. Primarily Larry does most of this because he's available. He's in the room with us, right? And it's easier to get him than to bring the other actors back. But they're brought back too. And so lots of lines, a lot of story point lines are delivered that way, as well as funnier versions of jokes, or new jokes are written all the time and dropped in when you can't see the actors' faces.
It's just such an amazing process. Now, how long does it take to, and you told me before we went on, there's actually 2 of you that have alternated even and odd episodes, I guess, for season 6, 7, 8. What's the other fellow's name?
Steve Rash, who's been there essentially from the beginning on the show.
Okay. I want to make sure we give him plenty of credit as well. So, how long... Now, a typical sitcom, scripted, I'm guessing probably has to be edited, within a set period of time, especially for a network show. Uh, does a show like Curb take longer to edit because of the way it's constructed and
Much
shot?
longer. Yeah, we spend about 2 months per 30-minute episode, which is substantially
Oh
longer
my
than
God!
a typical TV show. And part of it is because it takes so much longer to craft the scene out of the improv raw footage, and also because Larry is very hands-on, and so I'll cut the first version of the show, and then Larry will come in and sit down with me, and sometimes some of the other producers slash writers, and we'll go through all the raw footage together. We'll watch it together, and Larry will say, "Oh, I like that joke," or "That's a good premise." And so I'll mark those, and then he'll leave, and then I'll squeeze all that new stuff into my cut, which will then get fatter and fatter. And so until we have maybe a 45-minute cut on average for a 30-minute show. On network television, shows are 22 minutes or 21 and change. So you got to, if we had to cut it to that time format, we'd have to cut it down to 22 minutes. But because it's for HBO, we have to cut it to 29 minutes and 58 seconds or under. And so a lot of the shows are 29 minutes and 58 seconds because we cram as much funny as we can into the show. There are a few shows that go longer. They ask HBO, Larry asks, "Hey, can I go longer on an episode or two? A special episode like last season, the table read, when the Seinfeld actors were all there, and there was so much great stuff that HBO gave us extra time for that one. There's an episode this season that I edited it's with Bill Buckner. I don't know if you recall Bill Buckner.
Of course, Bill through my legs, Buckner.
Exactly. Yeah, lost the World Series in 1983, I think it was, or 4 or 5, something in the early 80s.
Boston
Anyway,
Reds.
he's in episode number 9, which is probably my favorite episode of the episodes I cut, and it's a longer episode because it worked. It felt longer, and some episodes seem to be able to support that. And so yeah, watch for the Bill Buckner episode 9. That's probably the one that I enjoyed the most out of the whole season.
Well, we need to take a quick break. I want to come back. Got plenty more questions. This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to and hopefully watching the Mr. Media interview with film and television director and editor Roger Nygard. And we'll be right back.